Accessing information on screenwriting has never been more approachable thanks to the internet. But I must admit, the lines between research and procrastination can at times be a little blurry. I have found that it is far easier to convince myself that I'm doing the work by watching movies. And if a film is really good, I find myself sinking into the story and able to think about the mechanics of how it was put together. Someone once said, being a good writer is 3% talent and 97% not being distracted by the internet. And I couldn't agree more. To be a better writer, it starts with being a better reader, not a better watcher of movies. So I came up with a fun idea. I challenged myself to read a screenplay every day for a month. My hope was to incorporate an element of focus into my writing practice. By spending times in the scripts themselves, I couldn't be distracted by amazing actors, locations, or soundtracks. I got to do a deep dive into the mechanics of a story. Today I'm going to share 5 things that I learned from reading a screenplay every day for a month, and I feel I should acknowledge that I did choose the shortest month in the year to do this challenge. This is a list of all the screenplays I read, and with that, let's jump into the first thing I learned. The first thing I learned is that storylines can be very similar, and that it is ultimately the writer who holds the reins to steer the story in the direction that they want the story to go. A screenplay could start with a lead desperately trying to work through a problem, and as a result find themselves in an adventure that transforms their character. The result is that perhaps one film could leave you feeling inspired and positive, and another film could leave you feeling a little bit uncomfortable because maybe you've been challenged to the core on your perspective of life. Here I learned to play around with my idea. As a writer, we may have a story on our heart that looks like it is going in one direction, but if we were to play with the style of the story, we could even steer it into a completely different direction. For some reasons, my screenplays usually start pretty dark and dramatic. I personally enjoy light-hearted content, so I find it a fun activity to tweak the story somewhat so that I experiment with it in different styles. This allows me to view the story through a different lens. But the trick here, ultimately, is that the story needs to remain true and honest. There was a screenplay I read where I felt the writer was trying to push a scene into something funny, but it didn't land for me because it felt like in the attempt for a laugh, the heart of the story was lost. Next, what I found interesting is that I often grouped stories into evergreen screenplays and somewhat time-specific screenplays. I was hugely challenged that what is hip and happening now could potentially be outdated in the future. You're probably looking for some examples here. So off the top of my mind, screenplays I read like Inside Out, Searching for Bobby Fischer, and Good Will Hunting are examples of stories that I feel can stand the test of time. I haven't seen Searching for Bobby Fischer or Inside Out yet. I've only read the screenplays, but the stories seem as relevant to me now as when they were written. Then there were screenplays that had quite a large tech component to it. And what was interesting to me is I'm sure that tech was relevant at the time of the screenplay, but maybe when the movie was released, or even if I have to reflect on it now, it does make the film seem a little bit outdated. And in reading the screenplay, it didn't feel evergreen. And this all was particularly testing to me because the screenplay that I am currently developing had a large social media element towards the end of it. And there were 2 other screenplays that I've written in the past that also had a large tech component to them as well. So the pile that I referred to as Evergreen scripts, when I reflected on those, man, it just made me want to do more with my current screenplay that I'm developing, so that hopefully at the end of the writing process, I would feel confident enough to put it in that pile as well. And now I'm still going to stay on the topic of social media. I picked up in some of the screenplays that social media or technology could actually remove the agency from the protagonist, ultimately leaving the lead somewhat passive. Also, in the book Save the Cat, Blake Snyder talks about keeping the press out in an attempt to keep the magic of the story alive. In some instances, not all, I I did find that social media can blow the reality of the premise in the same way the press does. It surprised me how much more I enjoyed the screenplays where social media or technology were not the antagonist, the catalyst, or the buddy to the hero. Okay, number 4. I find that reading a screenplay, it can activate your imagination to just play a movie in your mind, or even if you've seen the movie, when you read the screenplay, you can re-watch or relive that movie. It's amazing. I really enjoy it. That said, something I never expected to pick up on was voice. I didn't know it was a thing until I read a screenplay called Voicemails to Isabel. This isn't a film yet, and it should be. Anyway, I had never enjoyed the action element of a screenplay so much as I did with this film. The author had a distinct voice that glowed as much as the story in the screenplay. I could not wipe the smile off my face as I was reading. This ultimately challenged me to think about my voice when it comes to writing. Obviously, the focus should be on the story on the screenplay, not on the person writing it. But after reading the screenplay, I started picking up the voice of the authors in other screenplays. And what was interesting to me is when there was a distinct voice, surprisingly, those were the screenplays that I did enjoy reading the most. It has that cherry on the cake effect, if you know what I mean. Then, I always kind of assumed that we had a few pages of grace before the inciting incident happened. I was surprised to find screenplays like Being the Ricardos and Searching for Bobby Fischer hooking me within the first page, or at least the first 3 pages, with a question or a statement that had me wanting to learn more. Or even in The Wedding Date, where the opening images of a woman crying and you want to find out why. Or in 10 Things I Hate About You, how one girl has the power to shake up an entire school. Screenplays that hooked me even before the inciting incident stood out. Not only early on, but it's like these screenplays managed to maintain that level of intrigue throughout. And this inspired me a lot when it came to developing my screenplay. Some other things that stood out worth mentioning are a well-used montage can go a long way. In Legally Blonde, for an example, a montage is used just after the midpoint as we see Elle find her groove and we see her step into her potential. The rhythm of the montage builds this positive forward momentum that really impacts the pace of how it feels to read the screenplay or watch the movie. It keeps things exciting. Okay, then there were also some scenes in screenplays that literally had me thinking, how on earth did you come up with this? These moments include scenes that you could find in The Proposal, as an example. I don't know if you remember the eagle, the dog, and the phone, and how they all worked independently, but as well as just fitting in with the story as a whole, ultimately gripping the audience, making us laugh, adding to the conflict in ways that were comical and brilliant, and this carried through all the way to the end scene. A few of the screenplays I read had these additives added to the mix, and as somebody who is knee-deep in the writing process, I loved taking on the challenge of this activity, and I found that it gives the phrase thinking out of the box a whole new meaning. And then I feel this one is a little bit obvious but still worth taking note of. Characters that were well thought out and complex. Those screenplays, I cannot tell you how I connected with those characters and my heart broke for them. I wanted to see them win. I was truly invested in those screenplays. So off the top of my mind, some examples are Brooklyn, The Wedding Date, 500 Days of Summer, 10 Things I Hate About You, and Something's Gotta Give. I definitely recommend reading those screenplays if you'd like to see my take on what I think are prime examples of robust characters. Then I could go on about voiceover, I could go on about dialogue and structure, but I think this video is long enough for today. Give me a thumbs up if you found it valuable, and consider subscribing to my channel if you'd like to see more content from me in the future. I highly recommend doing the screenplay challenge. I gained so much from it that impacted how I was thinking in the developmental phase of my screenplay. But let me know in the comments below if there's a screenplay that you've read that has really impacted the way that you write movies. I'd love to perhaps give them a read if I can find them. But otherwise, thank you for spending your time with me. Good luck with writing your screenplay, and I'll see you in one of my next videos. Take care. Bye. Woo!
julep, pop, 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 julep, pop, 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 julep.